Good evening.
Recording in progress.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the May 26, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. We are holding our first hybrid meeting with some participants in the council chambers, and others have joined virtually via Zoom. This meeting is being webcast on Comcast TV channel 15 and live streamed on the city's YouTube channel and on the city website. We can do roll call. Ms. Avinta Marukansh. Bear with us. We are working through this together.
Thank you. Commissioner Ali Sullivan.
Aye, present.
Commissioner Bonilla. Absent. Commissioner Goldstein. Absent. Commissioner Lowe.
Here.
Commissioner Roche.
Here.
Commissioner Stevens.
Present.
Chair Okenda.
Present, and then also we can hold it open just if they come in a few minutes late, we'll mark them present if we get them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we do have quorum. Not that we're voting on anything. Okay, well, let's go ahead and start off. I gotta pull up the agenda. We can go ahead and start off here with the public comment, I believe. But I don't see any attendees or people in the public right now. So I will quickly open the public comments for items not on the agenda. Do you want to give the spiel for good measure?
Thank you. Okay. Community members wishing to join the meeting via Zoom can follow the information on the first page of the agenda, which is displayed on the screen right now. Planning Commission members and members of the public participating by Zoom wishing to speak should use the raise hand feature. Members participating via teleconference wishing to speak should dial *9. In-person community members wishing to speak can scan the QR code located in the back of the room and complete the online speaker card. The chair will announce speakers in the order online cards are submitted. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We have one attendee. Is there anybody wishing to give public comment? If you want to give public comment, now is your chance on anything not on the agenda. We do have 2 work session items coming up, but going once.
Chair Okenda.
Yeah. Who is that?
This is the city attorney,
Okay.
Michael Lawson.
Thank you. Hi, Mike. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm just appearing briefly to make an announcement regarding staffing. I'll just do it now,
Sure.
if I might. With me are Assistant City Attorney Joe Brick and Senior Assistant City Attorney Michael Vigilia. Joe Brick, who has been your counsel for a number of years, is going to be separating from the city, moving to Southern California, making a life decision. He's going to be getting married, and that's where his fiance, who is also a lawyer, lives and practices. He'll be transitioning out in the middle of June. Mike Vigilia will be assuming the role of your counsel starting tonight. I believe that you've met Mike a number of occasions because he handles the cannabis land use matters and has previously advised the commission, probably before some of you were appointed. So Mike and Joe are on the line. Joe, would you like to make a few comments?
Yeah, I would just like to thank the commission and planning staff, and staff in general.
You've all been wonderful. I believe we've got a really top-notch commission right now. The quality of the commissioners is just outstanding. The discussions are outstanding, and that's in light of some very, very hard challenges that the state's thrown at you. So I appreciate all of you working with me over the past, decade, and I'm humbled for being able to work with you, and just very honored. So I'm leaving you in very capable hands. Mike Vigilia, as you know, has covered Planning Commission for me when I'm not available, and he's certainly a fantastic lawyer, and you're in good hands. Thank you.
Congratulations, Joe. Thank you for all your service and the commission and to the city. And I wish you the absolute best in the next steps in your journey. Again, congratulations.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to sign off. I think Joe's going to sign off, and Mike Vigilia is going to stay on with you.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okie doke. We are going to ask one more time, because I didn't close public comment yet, but I'm going to ask one more time if there's anybody that wants to speak in public comment. We have one attendee. I don't see anybody. Okay, I'm going to close public comment, which means we can go on to the first agenda item, which is on the REACH code ordinance, and I'm guessing we have a staff presentation. If staff can present, please. Thank you.
Yes, good evening, commissioners. Hi, my name is Eric Pearson. I'm the Environmental Services Manager for the city. I think I've met some of you, but it's been a little while since I've presented to the commission. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. So this report presents some considerations for a new REACH code that may be adopted later this year. Staff has had a couple of discussions with the Council Sustainability Committee earlier this year, and we are currently developing draft ordinance elements based on the Sustainability Committee's input, as well as input we've received from the community. And then we intend to combine that along with what we received from the commission tonight, and then we'll be presenting to the full city council on June 21st. So the REACH code is a local ordinance that amends the state building code. Hayward's current REACH code was adopted by council in March of 2020. It supports our efforts to end the use of natural gas in buildings, which is a key strategy of our climate action plan. And the code also requires additional electric vehicle charging that are above infrastructure that's above and beyond the state requirements. And we have a web page for the REACH code that has the ordinance, the current ordinance, as well as checklists for builders and developers. So this page has also been updated with new information about the efforts to update the code. The current REACH code has three primary components. It requires that all new single-family homes and low-rise multifamily buildings, that means up to 3 stories, have to be all electric. High-rise buildings and commercial buildings can be either all electric or mixed fuel, meaning they can include natural gas. If they are mixed fuel, they have to have additional solar and extra energy efficiency requirements. So, and then the third component is the EV charging requirements that are above and beyond the state code. The current code is going to expire at the end of this year. The state codes are updated on a 3-year cycle. And so the new state code takes effect in January 2023. In order to continue the current REACH code requirements, a new ordinance would need to be adopted this year in order to be effective in January 2023. The REACH code is part of this strategic roadmap approved by council. The first roadmap was adopted in January 2020, and then it was updated a few weeks ago. But these 3 projects listed here are just some of the many projects identified in the strategic roadmap, but these are the ones that are directly related to the REACH code. And you can see that projects C1 and C2 were completed when the current REACH code was adopted in March 2020. And then the C10 is to explore the feasibility of banning natural gas in non-residential buildings. And so that's something that could be a part of this year's REACH code. In 2019 and 2020, staff worked very closely with East Bay Community Energy and a consultant team to prepare the current code. This year, we are working with a larger collaboration, the same consultant team and EBCE, as well as Peninsula Clean Energy and Silicon Valley Clean Energy. This Bay Area working group has created a website. They have model REACH codes as well as resources for both developers and staff that are preparing REACH codes. So in March this year, we reviewed these 7 different topic areas with the Sustainability Committee. And so to summarize, they are new low-rise residential requirements. The Sustainability Committee agreed that we should continue the current all-electric requirements. Then for new non-residential and high-rise buildings, the committee supported the idea of eliminating the mixed fuel pathway, but also wants to see some flexibility to allow gas in certain limited exemptions. And then we have accessory dwelling units. The current code exempts detached ADUs that are less than 400 square feet. And so the committee asked for some more cost information regarding the cost of going all electric with an ADU. And we are expecting a new cost effectiveness study to be released soon that will have more information about that. And then we have items 4 through 6 here that are really about existing buildings. We're recommending that these items be deferred until the next code cycle as we need more time to research options and costs associated with upgrading existing buildings. There's also significant equity implications. And then end of flow as number 5 here, that's the idea that you basically adopt a policy or an ordinance that says that by a certain year, we are going to cap off all the existing gas lines. And the only jurisdiction that we're aware of that's done that at this point is Half Moon Bay. Anyway, and then also regarding existing buildings, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District is currently in the process of developing rules that could ban the sale of gas appliances like gas water heaters and furnaces, which could take effect by 2030. So we should know later this year or early next year if those rules are going to be adopted. And then finally, the 7th category is the EV charging. The Sustainability Committee indicated a preference for aggressive requirements, but again, also asked for more information about cost. And so regarding the single family and low-rise residential buildings, this has been, I'd say, the simplest part of the code. The builders like it. It saves money when you don't have to run gas lines into a new building. It also saves time, given that they can avoid the additional coordination needed with PG&E to connect gas lines. For the new non-residential and high-rise buildings, I mentioned that we're recommending eliminating the mixed fuel option. Of the permits applied for since the REACH code went into effect a couple of years ago, none have opted for the mixed fuel approach, given that the electric approach is simpler and cheaper to design and build. For the new code, we're intending to recommend that gas not be allowed for any new residential building, but that would include also any mixed use buildings. So anything that's got commercial on the first floor. You know, basically what we're currently thinking is that if the building has any residential in it, then there would be no gas in that building. Then for the buildings that are strictly non-residential, we have a few options. We could ban gas, but then have certain exceptions for certain industrial uses and possibly certain restaurants. The second option would be to simply ban gas just for water heating and space heating. And then as those are the simpler technologies to go electric with. And then the third would be to simply rely on the energy code, as the energy code that takes effect next year is going to encourage electric for space heating and water heating. Regardless, we could also require electric readiness, meaning that if there's gas in the building, we can still require that the building be designed and have all the wiring in place to go all electric at some point in the future. Regarding the first option, to have exceptions, staff is really studying this carefully because exceptions can be difficult to enforce. We want to make sure that there would be objective criteria, and we don't want to burden staff with a lot of exception requests or questions about when an exception might apply. So we're currently leaning towards either options 2 or 3 here for non-residential buildings. So I mentioned for new accessory dwelling units, the current code exempts detached ADUs that are less than 400 square feet. The main reason for this is just given the limited square footage, and a heat pump water heater has to have a tank, and so it definitely takes up more space than a tankless gas-fired water heater. And so we're currently working on this one. We're still investigating because there may be a tankless electric alternative. But it's in the big picture, there's only a few cases that are subject to this requirement. We did a review of all the ADUs permitted since 2015, and there were 320 ADUs permitted, and less than 10% were detached and less than 400 square feet. And then in April of this year, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District adopted new thresholds of significance that are to be used in the environmental analysis when evaluating new projects under CEQA. These thresholds are used to determine the significance of an environmental impact. And these thresholds used to be numeric, but now they've changed them to qualitative thresholds due to the state's goal to be carbon neutral by 2045. So the district is recommending that local jurisdictions use these guidelines here, and that would be that in order for a project to not have a significant impact on the environment, it either has to have no gas installed as part of it, or it has to be consistent with a local climate action plan. And so we are working with our consultant team as we're updating our climate action plan right now to identify a path for meeting that carbon neutrality goal by 2045, but also allowing some flexibility to allow some projects to include gas in the near term, with the idea that those buildings may need to switch over to all electric in the future. And then we have the last section here is EV charging, and we currently have different requirements for different land use types, basically single family, multifamily, and then non-residential. And there's also different levels of EV charging readiness. And so I'd like to take a moment to explain some of those. And we also have different power levels. And so there used to be 3 power levels when we adopted the current code, but now there are 4. And so level 1 is the lowest power. This is kind of your standard household outlet, and it'll give you 3 to 4 miles of range per hour of charge. And we have a low power level 2. This is the new category. This is a 20 amp circuit that can give you 10 to 15 miles per hour of charge. Then we have high power level 2, which can give you up to 30 miles of range per hour. And then a fast charge, which could be up to 400 amps. And that's what you might see in a commercial parking lot or commercial setting. Staff is not recommending any level 1 chargers. They're not expected to be useful in the coming years as technology advances, and car batteries are getting larger, and it would take a very long time to charge on a level 1. So then we have three kinds of readiness that are defined in the code. First, there's EV capable, which means that the parking space has, there's space in the electric panel that's needed for the capacity, and then there's conduit run from the panel to the parking space. Then we have EV ready, which means it's EV capable, plus you include the wiring and the outlet. And then we have electric vehicle charger installed, or EVCI, and that includes the actual charging equipment. And then sometimes this is also referred to as EVSE, just to keep things interesting, which means electric vehicle supply equipment. So that just means, again, that the equipment is installed at the time of new construction. So this graph shows that it is significantly cheaper to install EV charging infrastructure at the time of new construction. The new construction is shown here in blue, and versus the cost of doing it at the time of a retrofit, shown here in orange. And so increasing code requirements for charging for new construction can save a building owner significant money in the future by installing it at the time of new construction rather than waiting for that future demand to come around. So the current requirements for non-residential buildings are the state code is increasing from 6% to 15% of the spaces have to have some level of charging. Our current REACH code requires for an office building 20% level 2 EV chargers installed and 30% EV capable. And then for non-office, it's 15% level 2 with EV chargers installed. And so we're recommending that these requirements be left unchanged for the new code. For single-family homes, we currently require 2 level 2 EV-ready spaces. And again, we're recommending that we keep the code as it is. For multifamily, there are currently the new state code, or the state code currently requires only 10% of the spaces to have some level of charging. The new state code is going to be 40%. Our current REACH code requires 100% of the spaces to have some type of EV charging, either level 2 EV ready or level 2 EV capable. And but we're recommending that these be modified with either option A or option B. And option A would be all high power level 2 spaces, with 60% being EV ready and 40% having chargers installed. Option B would have 80% of those parking spaces to be low power level 2. And basically that is cheaper due to the lower capacity needed in the electric panel or the electric service that's provided to the property. But another key strategy for minimizing the cost on multifamily is to have a load management software, so that you can have multiple vehicles plugged in at the same time, but they're not all charging at the same time. And so that software can allow for basically for those vehicles to take turns on the same circuit. Again, this shows the significant cost difference between a retrofit and new construction. This graph it incorporates the cost of new transformers and electrical panels. So more costs are captured in this graph, but basically for a market rate new construction, the cost would be about, and this is for a 60-unit multifamily project, about $76,000 for the EV charging infrastructure, compared to $240,000 for a retrofit. And so while it is cheaper to install at the time of new construction, it still does add cost. These estimates show basically the cost that is added, and this is for a 100-unit multifamily project to comply with the code. Basically, for the new state code, it's going to be about $146,000 to comply. And then we have the options A and B. These were presented to the Council Sustainability Committee a few weeks ago. And we had, I guess, a mixed comments from the committee. Some opted for option A and some for option B. But basically, these are significant costs, but they're still a small percentage of the total cost of construction. Less than 1%. However, I have to note that the cost could be significantly higher when accounting for the cost of transformers that are difficult to predict in terms of some properties will need that and some won't. So regarding outreach, we've done, there were 2 public workshops hosted by the Bay Area Regional Working Group. We advertised those workshops to our network of builders and developers who have received permits from the city in the last few years. We've also talked individually with affordable housing developers and also industrial developers. We also met with the Chamber of Commerce a few weeks ago. And kind of the theme of the responses that we've heard are that there should be exceptions included, especially for the industrial properties. There's definitely a need for life science and biotech companies to have gas available. And those are some industries that we're trying to attract to Hayward. So another part is that with industrial developers, as I'm sure many of you know, a lot of these buildings are built on speculation, so they don't know who the tenant is going to be when the building is being designed or constructed. And so it's difficult to know whether or not gas is going to be needed for that future tenant. As far as next steps go, I mentioned we'll be presenting to the full City Council on June 21st, and then we'll be going back to the Council Sustainability Committee in July, hopefully with a draft ordinance at that time. And then we may be presenting an ordinance to Council in October for adoption. So that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the presentation. Can we go to public comment first, and then we'll come back and do commissioner questions and comments. Since this is a work session item, there is no vote. Can we do that first? And if so, then
Yes, we do have one speaker.
Great.
Via Zoom.
I had a question about the single family requirement. When you say 2 level 2 ready spaces per dwelling unit, does that mean 2 distinct chargers or like a 2-car garage with a single charger that could reach both spaces?
It would be, I guess it could be, depending on the design of the charger, it could be 1 charger. But really it's a matter of having the circuit and the outlet in place that is capable of serving 2 cars with the level 2 power.
But would that mean 2 level 2 charging slots, or would that mean 1? Because it's quite a difference. They need like separate panels, usually separate breakers. It's actually the same sort of charger, same sort of outlet that you would use for like a refrigerator or a washing machine or something like that. So you might not exactly get what you expect to be plugged in if there's 2 of them unnecessarily. Okay.
You know, I guess that's a question I'd like to check on this with our building staff. I think that, you know, you could probably handle this with the same strategy that we're recommending for multifamily situations where you can have load management software, you know, that allows the 2 cars to be charged at different times. But yeah, I guess I'd like to follow up on that one.
Just in general, FYI, the cars generally come with charging like logic already like built into the car. So you can program what times they charge. And there's not really any need to have 2 of them plugged in at the same time, in my experience.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Just for our record, can the speaker, is that Andre Von Horn? Was that who that just spoke? Okay.
Yes, that's me.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure. Alrighty, and doesn't look like there's anybody else available to make public comment, so we're going to go ahead and close the public comment and go on to commissioners' questions and comments on the REACH code. This is a work session. There is no vote, but all is welcome. Let me see here. Oh yeah, there's a whole thing here. Speakers button. Okay, Commissioner Roach.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Eric. I do have some questions. One that was addressed in the staff report, but the parking requirements, because as was addressed in the staff report, the new California law allows density bonuses of 0 parking in an affordable housing structure. And so I'm wondering what can we do? Because this will be in conflict. The REACH code will be in conflict if we need to have a significant increase in EV charging on multifamily housing. How do you propose, or what is your input about that?
Yes, so I understand, or we've had many, we've had some affordable housing projects that have been exempt from the EV charging requirements because they've been able to take an allowance under the density bonus law. We would like to find a requirement that is manageable so that these projects are not requesting to be fully exempt, and we could get some level of EV charging for affordable housing. At this point, we've been focusing on what the requirement would be for market rate projects. And I would expect that we're going to land for affordable housing. It'll be some percentage lower than the market rate, but we have not come up with a specific percentage at this point.
Okay.
I think,
go ahead.
It's just that, it could be more level 2, low power level 2 spaces, and it could be more EV capable rather than the EV ready.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think that affordable housing complex would have just as much of a need as the market rate housing. So, yeah, I'd want to look at that before that was decided, because I think especially in a multifamily, people are going to need to be able to park their electric cars, which is what we're trying to encourage people to do. So, and I understand it will be in conflict with state law. So it sounds like there's some conversations that have to be held around that. Then my other question is, it was also mentioned in the staff report that, developers don't want to be responsible for being, they're not charger operators. They would like that to be on the utility side. So I'm wondering, how is this working? I mean, obviously charging stations are going in housing and non-residential. So whose responsibility is it?
Well, I believe it's the responsibility of the property owner or property manager. There may be some services out there that the property manager can subscribe to, but to have that the tenants pay for the electricity themselves, that would require a separate meter for those chargers. So I suppose it would have to be wired that way at the time of the installation.
Okay. And then the other question I had is sort of a practical question about, changing the multi-story residential to all electric. Just sort of out of practicality, if the electricity goes out, then presumably the elevators go out, and that means without a gas stove, you can't even boil water or cook, and if you can't get down the elevator, if you're disabled, what are and I'm just sort of wondering from the city's perspective, is this answered by increases in generators? I mean, how will this be addressed? Because I know, for example, at home, the power goes out, we can't cook anything with our electric stove, but we can go in the backyard and turn on the barbecue. We can break out a camp stove because we can go outside. How is this addressed?
Well, yeah, that's. I think that's been the thinking for the most part, is that people have access to outdoor cooking, but I guess that's not available for a lot of multifamily residents. The state code does not require it yet, but it will be requiring batteries to be installed in future years. At this point, batteries are optional, but
What do you mean batteries for each unit in a multi-residential, or sort of storage batteries at a whole complex?
I think it would be something that could be, well, I guess it depends. If each individual unit has its own electric meter, then it would need to be per unit. So, yeah, I guess, the one thing to, that we've been talking about is like a lot of the appliances, even the current gas appliances like water heaters or furnaces, they require a electric ignition for the pilot light. So, retaining gas appliances for the purpose of when the power goes out is not always, it's not going to, it doesn't mean that the appliance is going to work when the power goes out. With a range, yeah, that is a challenge. It's often possible to light a gas range without electricity.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I just think we need to make sure we have a solution in place, especially like I said, in the high-rise residential, because I would be concerned about what people, are able to, how people are able to take care of themselves in the event of a power outage. Let's see, I think that might be all of my questions, so I will pass back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Roach. Commissioner Stevens.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. So this is something I'm really, really excited about, and I have a couple quick questions. The first one is, in your team's study, have you did any exploration of the potential of renewable natural gas and how that might actually impact how we look at natural gas's future in the city?
We have not taken a look at renewable natural gas. I think my understanding is that it would need to be provided through the same pipelines as regular natural gas. I think that, to be honest, I just don't know if there's enough, if there would be enough renewable natural gas out there to fully replace the fossil fuel natural gas. So I'm not sure if it's a viable option.
Thank you. I would encourage a little bit of look at how natural gas applies to industrial uses, especially in the biotechnology and other commercial manufacturing sectors where I know there's some really, really interesting things happening with cogen plants, especially using renewable natural gas. So the second item I'd just like to talk a little bit about is that for a high power level 2 charger, typically that's run on a 40 ampere circuit. They typically draw 30 amperes at 240 volts, and that's a pretty reasonable charging time for a typical electrical vehicle. The typical unit you see has 2 charge points on it, so that's a 240 volt 2-pole circuits. I guess my question is, when you talk about a multifamily building, you're talking, I think, and if I looked at the proposed amendments to the REACH code, that's a pretty significant electrical system for charging. And I think if I understand correctly, there's technology that's available that allows the chargers to regulate how much energy is drawn. Is that what I understood?
Yes.
I guess my question, though, is the building code requires no circuit to exceed 80% of its amp rating, and a continuous load must be calculated at 125% of its rated value. So I guess, is there, is there some mystery that's going on that we're able to bypass what the California Building Code, the California Electrical Code requires rated to these panels?
I am not sure. I'll need to check on that. I understand what you're talking about, and I just don't know if the code requirement takes into account the load management software.
Thank you. And I've tried to study this over the last couple of months, and I've been confused by it. So this is sort of my endpoint. The only comment I'd like to make is that I think when we exceed the state's requirements, we create a lot of complexity for our planning and building department. And I really, really hope, or I suggest, that we stay as close to the state standards as possible, because there's a lot of great experts that are, working the building code and really developing things that contractors and builders can actually implement. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you, Commissioner Stevens. Commissioner Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I have two what I think will be pretty short questions. I wanted to know, is the same equipment required or needed to have the EV capable for low and high level 2 chargers?
Meaning the same charging equipment?
Yes.
I'm guessing that there's different chargers for the different amperage levels, but I need to follow up on that as well.
Okay, so then another question I had was, what was the difference in cost? But it sounds like maybe that's a question for another day as well.
Right, I can follow up on that as well.
Okay, I'm just trying to get an idea as to what the differences in costs are for the developers, and as it relates to option A and option B. Also, I was curious, with option A and option B, one just would require high power, and one would allow for low power ready and high power ready. Which is more likely, based upon your research, to be the wave of the future? Do we expect that the low power will still be highly used in the future, or do we expect that it'll mostly be high power, or do we really think that in 20 years from now there'll be a combination and that will be completely normal and common?
I think in residential settings, we're going to see a lot of low power level 2, given that in a residential setting, that car can be plugged in for many hours during the night. And over that time period, you can get a sufficient charge to handle the typical commute. So yeah, I think that the high power level 2 is going to be more common in commercial settings and cases where somebody needs to charge in, or maybe, we're a visitor to wherever needs to charge in just a couple of hours.
So do you expect that the option B, I'm just asking, would option B then be more plausible if you really think that low power is more likely to be used in more of the residential setting, and the high power is expected to be used in more commercial setting? Is that 80-20 split a better option?
Yeah, I think that the low power would be sufficient, and then that 20% of high power could be for people that are visiting the property.
And between option A and option B, which is staff leaning more towards?
At this point, I think option B.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Lowe. We're going to jump onto the Zoom, folks. Commissioner Goldstein.
I was starting to wonder whether or not you could see my hand raised, but thank you for calling on me. Can you pull up the presentation again? I've got questions on slides 18 and 19.
Sure.
Yeah, good. So In the past, it was one level 2 EV capable per parking space per dwelling unit. We currently have 2 level 2 EV ready spaces per dwelling unit. California is making no changes, but we're recommending to keep 2 level 2 EV ready spaces per dwelling unit. But at the same time, the state of California is making some effort. I don't know if the legislation is passed, but actually removing the number of parking spaces. So I'm wondering, does it still make sense going into the future when the number of parking spaces might disappear, or at least no longer be regulated, the minimum number that is, does it still make sense to have 2 level 2 EV ready spaces? Now I understand ready just simply means that the infrastructure is there, the charger is not. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. I believe the current ordinance addresses this, you know, in the event that there's only maybe a 1-car garage for the home, then only 1 would be required. I don't remember, I don't think it accounts for the possibility that there be no parking spaces for the home, but we could write that flexibility into the ordinance. The way that the multifamily requirements are written, it's basically percentage of parking provided. So it's kind of, you know, it's all based on what's actually provided. And we know that there's some cases where there is no parking. But we could have that same flexibility in the single family portion.
Sure. Now, I understand when we're just talking about the infrastructure costs, we're literally talking maybe $500. You know, the cost of the conduit and the cabling and the extra circuit and the panel. So I realize it's not a high cost. It just, you know, from the logic of where we're going relative to the number of parking spaces per dwelling unit, it just left that question mark for me. On page 19, option A, option B, are these options that you're recommending for city council to decide? So they're going to pick one or the other, or would the builder be able to decide what direction they wanted to go?
This was intended more for council to decide on. So
okay.
That would be one or the other would end up in the code.
Sure, right. Very good. And I can see some good reasons why you probably want to do that. But if I can make a recommendation to, you know, option C, let the builder choose. Now, I realize that the builders mostly are, you know, our thinking is they want to cut costs and, you know, deliver a high quality product. But I think there's some excellent rationale for them to, you know, build up the higher power level 2 with the equipment. And so it might be that market that they're after could be that. In any event, I'm not trying to say one way or the other, but I would just simply ask to consider that, maybe the builders want the option to choose.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. A couple comments. So first of all, by the way, just to put some context around this, for the last 12 years, I've been volunteering in emergency communications, and in that role, working for the sheriff's office, volunteer. I've run across a lot of information about what actually happens in disasters like power outages and things like that. One of the often neglected issues that comes up is the safety of people and families when the power does go out. And one of the things that happens is that people naturally are inclined towards, you know, pulling out some gas-powered stove to cook on, especially if it's cold outside. They might do that in the garage, or unfortunately, sometimes even inside the house, or they may have a gas range and know how to light it, but the electric fan that eliminates carbon monoxide doesn't work. The fan doesn't work. And so there's actually an increase in fatalities during power outages in some places because people are not understanding very well what happens when you have a burning flame inside an enclosed space. And so I would just make some recommendation around that, that if nothing else, we put some training in place relative to how people should be operating for their own safety when the power is out. The idea of adding batteries to homes, I think, is a wonderful idea. Part of what stimulates that thought is some people turn to the option of using gas-powered generators. And again, that poses a problem. If the weather's rainy outside, they'll want to run the power generator inside the garage, and possibly without thinking about it, they might even close the garage. Some people have been known to run gas-powered generators inside their home, which of course has led to some tragedies, again, because of the buildup of carbon monoxide. And so there's another option out there, and those are called solar generators. It's just like any other electric generator, but rather than fueling it with gas, you fuel it with sun power. And they're more expensive than the gas-powered generators, sometimes about 3 times as much, but on the market today for between $1,000 and $1,500, you can get a complete kit that would allow you at least to run things like your refrigerators, your small hot plates, computers, keep your phones charged, possibly run satellite internet, TV, and a DVD player. So for those of you that are within earshot of this conference, I hope you'll look into that. Solar generators is the name of the technology. And there's plenty of suppliers out there. And then, Eric, I just think it would be a good idea, since we are talking about making some changes that could have life-impacting consequences assigned to it, that if you could kindly make that part of your presentation, the safety aspects of it and what the possible remedies are, I'd certainly appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Goldstein. Commissioner Ollie Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair Kenda. Thank you, staff, for the report. A couple comments and a couple questions. Eric, the first question, this is funny, I'm seeing myself on the big screen here. Regarding the cost for residential on the option A and option B, you note that option A and option B will increase costs from 0.4% of total bill to either 0.6 or 0.8. Is that cost inclusive of the savings that the builder will achieve through not having to pipe natural gas, or does that not include the savings, and so net it might be a wash?
Yeah, it does not account for the savings of the avoided gas lines.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really just looking at the added cost of the EV infrastructure.
Got it. And so theoretically, either this increase of either option A or option B could have the effect of not actually increasing any of their existing costs because there's some savings from not doing the gas. Right. Just a thought there. Regarding the option A and option B, as far as comments, I was sort of leaning towards thinking through option B, and the reason I was leaning that way is at the end of the day, you're still achieving the same goal of 100% of the spots being EV capable. But as you noted, typically if folks are charging at their house, they can leave it over longer periods of time, and so the speed is not as much of a concern. I do really like, though, what Commissioner Goldstein noted, that in reality, the difference in cost between option A and option B for the builder is exactly as he noted, some wiring and some additional components, so not significant. And so I like what Commissioner Goldstein noted as to possibly allowing the builder to choose between the options, either option A or option B or some combination thereof. Again, you're still achieving that impact of 100% of the spots being EV capable, so something to think about, and I thought that was a good idea. Talk about cost. On the non-residential units, it's sort of glaring that the residential our reach code is going for 100% of units to be EV capable. On the non-residential new construction, it's only 20%, I think is what your chart showed. Is there a reason why we're going for such a lower amount on the non-residential versus residential? Because that to me is a bit glaring.
I think the idea is that most cars have a sufficient range for people to only charge at home and not need to charge too much during the day while they're away from home. So.
Got it. I mean, obviously, I would love to see 100% of the spots in new construction for the non-residential be at least EV ready. I think that's definitely the trend of where we're going as a society and what we're seeing being put out on the market. What I guess does sort of give me a bit of confidence, though, that it doesn't necessarily have to be right now is, if I understood correctly, Eric, you note that every 3 years this is reviewed. Is that correct?
Right. Right.
Okay. So theoretically, this is something that could significantly be plussed up over the next 3, 6, 9 years as we start to see more proliferation of EVs. So just a thought. I mean, I would love to see the city pushing just as much or reaching just as much on the non-residential as we are the residential. If it's not in this cycle, then of course, in the near future, would certainly be something I'd like to see. And then the last comment, actually 2 more comments. One on the emergency preparedness. I would echo Commissioner Goldstein's comments on the emergency preparedness. Also, I agree with Commissioner Roche in that really sort of accounting for how we approach emergency situations, loss of power situations, for folks that typically would have had access to, say, a gas stove to cook or be able to light it. And if you're in a large apartment dwelling building and there is no sort of access to gas, what is that sort of second choice, right? So will we require batteries? How is that going to work in emergency situations? I thought it was a good point that Commissioner Roche brought up, and I would also agree with that and concur with that thought. So certainly something I think we should be thinking about as a city. The last comment on chargers, and I don't know how necessarily associated it is with the REACH code, but just from an experience perspective. So I live in a new community that has both on-street electric parking and then capabilities in the garages. That was a great selling feature, and so I appreciated having the unit already plugged for or wired for EV charging. There are also EV chargers in the street spots, which again I think is a great thing to have. I've lived in my community now 2 years, and those chargers are still not hooked up. They're not working. So the physical charger is in place in the street spots, but there's no power to them. And so, the question was brought up. I think one of my fellow commissioners asked this question sort of associated. I'd like to see us look at sort of a condition of approval for projects, and it might not be part of the REACH code, but just thinking about projects, it's all well and good to have the requirements for builders to put in the infrastructure and to put in these charging capabilities, but it does the residents no good and theoretically does the environment no good if they're not turned on and if they're not being able to be utilized. And so I think it's something for us to think about as a commission and for City Council as well, and for the planning department to think about beyond just the REACH code components, ensuring that we're still achieving the goals that we're trying to reach with these requirements, and that, for example, where there is a requirement for parking facilities, charging components in parking facilities, it's not just installing them, but it's actually turning them on. Because again, in my experience, I've been waiting 2 years for them to be turned on, and they're not turned on yet. So just wanted to share that. Otherwise, I'm very pleased to see the direction that the city is going, and excited about us continuing to push the envelope on the issue. Thank you, Chair Kenda.
Thanks, Commissioner Ollie Sullivan. All of my questions have been asked already, mostly pertaining to the options A and B and the costs that you all brought up and different things like that. So I actually have no questions or comments, and I'm ready to move on to the next item if nobody has any follow-ups. I don't see anybody online. Okay. Then we are going to move on to item number 2, which is related to the Climate Action Plan, and I believe we have a staff presentation for that as well. Thank you.
Yes, and if I may introduce Nicole Grucky, our Sustainability Specialist, and Carolyn Wiseman, our Climate Corps Fellow. They both presented this item to the City Council a couple days ago, and they will be making this presentation tonight.
Welcome and thank you. Very excited.
Great. Thank you, Eric, for the introduction, and good evening, commissioners. I will share my screen. All right. Yeah, as Eric mentioned, my name is Carolyn Wiseman, and I'm a Climate Corps Fellow with the city. And today we'll be providing updates on the Climate Action Plan, or the CAP, and environmental justice element. I will be discussing Hayward's greenhouse gas inventory and forecast, outreach for the Climate Action Plan, and considerations for developing greenhouse gas reduction measures. I'll then pass it over to Nicole to talk about outreach efforts for the environmental justice element and some other related projects. So the Climate Action Plan and creation of the new environmental justice element are part of a larger project to update elements of the 2040 general plan, including the housing element and safety element, which is required by the state. This presentation will primarily focus on the CAP and environmental justice element, but Nicole will be providing a brief update on the safety element later in the presentation. And these updates are all being combined because the issues of housing, environmental justice, safety and hazard planning, and climate change are all linked. So conducting outreach, planning, and environmental review for all the general plan amendments simultaneously will result in a more comprehensive and holistic approach to these issues. To give some quick background on the CAP, in July of 2009, Hayward adopted its first climate action plan, which included aggressive goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The CAP was then amended and incorporated into the general plan in 2014 and includes actions to meet the city's 2020 greenhouse gas reduction target set at 20% below 2005 levels. Then in June of 2020, Council adopted an ordinance amending the CAP and general plan to include the greenhouse gas reduction targets that are listed here on the slide, which are 30% below 2005 levels by 2025, 55% below 2005 levels by 2030, and then finally carbon neutrality by 2045. And the purpose of the CAP update is to establish local policies and programs that will help the city reach these goals. And the city is working with Rincon consultants to prepare the general plan amendments, and they also prepared the greenhouse gas forecast and analysis that I'll cover in the following slides. So as I mentioned, the current CAP includes actions to meet the city's 2020 greenhouse gas reduction target set at 20% below 2005 levels. And the city met this target 2 years early in 2018 with an emissions reduction of 21.6% from 2005 levels. Staff presented the 2019 inventory, which is our most recently completed inventory, to the Council Sustainability Committee in January of 2021, showing that emissions were reduced by 25.7% from 2005 levels. And the 2020 inventory is currently in progress, and we will be presenting it to the Sustainability Committee in July. Now to dive briefly into our 2019 greenhouse gas inventory, this graphic shows the breakdown of emissions in each sector in the city, and we can see here the dominance of natural gas and on-road transportation emissions in the city. And since presenting the 2019 inventory results, staff has made some updates per the recommendations of the consultants. So it was recommended that the city calculate on-road transportation emissions using data from a new source from Google called Environmental Insights Explorer, also called Google EIE for short. And we were previously using data from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which uses a transportation model based on transportation patterns, land use, and population metrics to estimate the emissions. And we switched to Google EIE because it provides location history data that is a real-time reflection of local changes in transportation use. So for example, Google EIE data reflected the changes in transportation that occurred during the pandemic, while the MTC transportation model did not. And after making those updates, the finalized 2019 inventory was used to forecast future emissions and calculate how much Hayward will have to reduce emissions through local initiatives and programs to meet our long-term target. So the project consultants provided forecasting for 2 scenarios, business as usual, and then an adjusted scenario that I'll talk about. So the first one here that's provided is Hayward's business as usual forecast. And this provides an estimate of how emissions are predicted to change over time from 2019 to 2045, given that the existing actions continue as they were in 2019 with no new regulations or actions that reduce local greenhouse gas emissions. So this forecast is based on projected trends in population growth and employment, and it's consistent with local and regional projections. This forecast scenario is adjusted for state and federal regulations and legislation. So there's multiple actions such as building efficiency standards and new transportation legislation, among some others that we outlined in the staff report, that are expected to cause a reduction in Hayward's greenhouse gas emissions in the coming years, specifically in the energy and transportation sectors for residential and non-residential activities. So if we look at the figures here, on the left for the business as usual, we have energy in blue and transportation in green. And as you can see, over time from 2019 to 2045, both of the emissions in both of these sectors are increasing. And when we compare that to the forecast that's adjusted for state and federal regulations and legislation, we see that they decrease slightly over time. And next, the consultants provided us with a gap analysis, which essentially compares the forecast to the city's long-term targets to quantify the emissions that need to be reduced through our local policies and programs in the CAP update. So in the figure, you can see the lighter blue line representing the business as usual forecast, and the yellow line for the adjusted forecast, which, as I mentioned, takes into account those state and federal regulations and legislation. And you can see the difference between those two lines as we saw in the previous slide in the bar graph. So the adjusted forecast is compared to Hayward's long-term target, which is the green line, which includes those milestone targets along the way in 2020, 2025, 2030, and then in 2045, where we ultimately reach carbon neutrality. And that hashed area between the yellow and the green lines is the gap that will be addressed by the CAP update. So overall, the forecast is really helpful for quantifying the emissions reductions that Hayward needs to tackle through its local policies and programs. And in addition to this analysis, the city is doing community outreach to ensure that those policies and programs that are being developed align with community needs and priorities. So now on to some community outreach that we've done for the CAP. Staff and consultants presented the figures and information that I just showed at a virtual public workshop on April 13th. And the meeting was open to the public and advertised through our project website, a leaflet article, and some emails to stakeholders. And we asked for feedback on these 4 prompts on the screen. And I'll briefly go through some of the feedback that we received. So first, we asked participants what their concerns about climate change and greenhouse gas emissions were. And we got a lot of responses about the disproportionate impact on low income and Black, Indigenous, people of color, or BIPOC communities. We heard about the health impacts associated with climate change, the livability and stability over time of being in Hayward, as well as resource scarcity, like the availability of food, water, or power. Additionally, we asked for potential opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the city. And we got a lot of responses regarding the on-road transportation sector. So specifically increasing affordability, accessibility, and safety of public transportation, electric vehicles, and biking, as well as reducing pollution from things like construction and the industrial sector. Next, we provided the participants with 7 different sectors and asked them to vote on which ones they would want to prioritize in the CAP. And the 4 here on the screen are the ones that received the most votes. And these are increasing public transit access, increasing tree count, electrifying new buildings, and then electrifying existing buildings. And the 3 sectors that did not receive as many votes as these were increasing electric vehicle charging infrastructure, increasing car sharing options, and then banning natural gas. Lastly, we asked how the participants would make the CAP more equitable. And we heard that the city should involve all residents by meeting people where they're at. So holding meetings in different regions of the city, compensating participants for their time, and providing translation services. Additionally, we heard that we should build capacity in frontline communities, meaning that any of the policies and programs that are in the CAP update are supporting those communities that are going to be hit hardest by climate change, and we're going to involve them in the process as we go. Lastly, we heard a lot of concerns about the impacts of climate change on future generations, and that we should involve the school district and students in this process. So the next step in the CAP update is to start developing greenhouse gas reduction measures. And this analysis will take into account the following criteria, which are the emissions reduction potential, co-benefits like cost savings or health benefits, the costs and challenges that are associated with implementing the measures, and then last but not least is equity. So we'll be asking the questions of who would the action benefit, who would the action not benefit, who is currently implementing the action, and who's not currently implementing the action and why. So we'll be thinking of these questions when going over draft measures and overall using them to inform decisions made about the project. And staff is seeking direction and ideas from the Planning Commission regarding potential greenhouse gas reducing measures that we should consider for the draft CAP. Staff is also currently working with Rincon consultants to analyze the potential measures and develop recommendations that are in line with the community input we received in our CAP public workshop and some other outreach that we've been doing. And I'll pass it over to Nicole now to talk about our environmental justice element.
Thank you, Carolyn, and good evening, commissioners. We're now going to transition a little bit to the environmental justice element that is part of this overarching project and will have crossover with the climate action plan development. So the environmental justice, or EJ element, is a new general plan element that is required by state law, SB 1000, for communities that have disadvantaged census tracts. To start the EJ element development process, our consultants created an environmental justice technical report. This report provides a technical analysis of the environmental justice context in the city of Hayward and was developed to be consistent with the latest state legislation. So based on state legislation, there are 6 focus areas, which are pollution exposure and air quality, public facilities, safe and sanitary homes, physical activity and public health, food access, and civic and community engagement. The analysis of these focus areas is supported by Cal EnviroScreen, a tool developed by Cal EPA that helps identify disadvantaged communities throughout California. The tool uses existing environmental, health, and socioeconomic data to rank census tracts based on 20 distinct indicators. So in general, the higher the score, the more impacted a community is by pollution burdens and population vulnerabilities. What you can see on the screen right now is the Cal EnviroScreen over Hayward and Hayward census tracts. So the most impacted communities are being shown in the dark orange, with the least impacted shown in dark green. So in February, the city hosted the first environmental justice public forum to discuss various environmental justice issues, and in particular, receive input on the focus areas of the element. So during the public forum, we engaged with residents through mural boards, which you can see a screenshot on your screen. And some key themes that we heard were that there is a need for accessible, low-cost healthcare. There's high traffic on main arterial roads, lack of healthy, affordable food options in many neighborhoods, lack of playground facilities, and a need for translation services and to meet people where they are to engage with community members. So this community input, along with the technical memo created by the consultants, was then used to create draft policy framework, which you can see on your screens. So once finalized, this framework will be used as an outline of key environmental justice topics specific to Hayward that will be addressed by the policies and programs identified in the element. The second environmental justice public forum was hosted at the end of April. And at this workshop, we asked community members to provide direct feedback on those topics identified as policy focal points in the draft policy framework, which were shown on the previous slide. So key themes that we heard in this workshop included traffic is a pollution burden. We need to focus on ways to increase public transit, active transit, transportation, and EV charging facilities. Look into food rescue programs, education programming around food access and increasing locally grown food, provide more housing support, especially to non-English speakers, and create more green space and partner with schools to do so. This feedback was incorporated as this feedback will be incorporated as the consultants and city staff work on creating a draft policies and programs as a part of the element. So staff is currently seeking direction and ideas from the Planning Commission regarding the areas listed above, as well as any additional EJ policies that should be considered in the EJ element. So along with the CAP update and new EJ element, staff is also preparing an update to the safety element of the general plan. The city is required to update the safety element due to several pieces of legislation that were triggered by updating the housing element. So as a part of the safety element update, the staff and consultant team have been working on evacuation scenario planning and drafting a climate vulnerability assessment. So while the CAP will focus on efforts to minimize climate change, the safety element will contain policies and programs supporting community resiliency and adaptation efforts. And staff anticipates bringing the safety element update amendments to the commission sometime in the fall or spring, along with the EJ element and housing element updates. So in addition to the outreach events that have already been discussed in a little greater detail today, city staff has been conducting public outreach for all general plan updates simultaneously with an emphasis on equity and extensive community involvement. So prior to the EJ and CAP community workshops, staff reached out to over 100 community-based organizations and groups in Hayward to gauge interest in collaborating on the general plan updates via email. Additionally, city staff went to 19 different locations across Hayward, including the farmers market, art stations, grocery stores, and laundromats, and distributed flyers in person. Additionally, city staff created a gallery walk event that was featured at City Hall, the downtown library, NAACP branch offices, and the AC Transit Authority offices. City staff has also been engaging with local colleges and universities. Chabot College students interviewed 250 residents about parks and 550 residents about housing. And students in a CSU East Bay class conducted surveys to 250 residents around the EJ element, areas of focus, and used that data to provide policy recommendations. Staff has also launched a survey seeking input on residents' priorities in relation to the climate action plan and will be available for residents to take for the rest of the month. We also hosted our first focus group earlier this week with high school students from Tennyson High's Green Team. City staff plans to continue to engage with the community throughout all steps of the general plan update process and keeping an updated website at haywardhousingandclimateupdate.com, where residents can find all upcoming events as well as view recordings and materials from all past outreach events. I'm going to turn it back over to Carolyn now.
Thank you, Nicole. So this report and presentation was also brought to the Council Sustainability Committee on May 9th and City Council on Tuesday. And some of the feedback received and updates from staff include engaging with local organizations and nonprofits and schools and churches like the ones listed on the slide. And as Nicole just mentioned, we had the focus group with the Tennyson High School Green Team on Tuesday, and we got some of their input on the same discussion questions that we had asked in the CAP public workshop around concerns and ideas to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Staff also just presented to the Sierra Club yesterday and is in the process of planning focus groups with Eden Housing, as well as continuing to reach out to additional community organizations to discuss this project. Additionally, we received feedback to ensure that strategic roadmap initiatives align with the proposed CAP and EJ initiatives. And as I mentioned, staff is currently in the process of reviewing the draft greenhouse gas reduction measures, and we're doing so with the strategic roadmap initiatives in mind. And lastly, we heard feedback on including policies and programs, both for individuals as well as for businesses. And for next steps, in July, staff will present the draft CAP and EJ measures, as well as the 2020 greenhouse gas inventory to the Council Sustainability Committee. And staff will continue to engage with the Hayward community to ensure that the EJ element and CAP respond to community needs and do so in an equitable way. So thank you for your time, and we can take any questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Let's see here. We'll do what we did last time and just open up public comment quickly. See if our attendee would like to provide comment. I only see one person. They're not raising their hand right now.
I do not see any public comments.
Okay, we will close public comment and move straight to commissioners. So this is open questions and comments. This is a work session item. We're not voting on anything. And we're going to start with the Zoom room this time. Commissioner Ollie Sullivan.
I wasn't expecting to go first. Thank you, Chair Kenda. A very quick question. I appreciate the report from staff, so thank you for all the details. I believe it was Caroline who gave the initial presentation that discussed the 7 CAP priorities and reviewing the analysis that was done, what the community was prioritizing and what the community was not prioritizing. And if I heard you correctly, it sounded like the 3 areas that the community deprioritized were issues that we actually just touched on and that we as a city are prioritizing, i.e. EV charging and natural gas. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, so we basically provided all of these 7 topics, and then we had everyone vote. So the ones that got the most, there weren't any, people didn't vote for any saying that they weren't prioritizing them. These before that I included were just the ones that had received the most votes out of all 7. So the ones that I did list did receive votes, and I don't have the numbers on hand, but.
Got it.
Yeah,
okay. It just struck me as, the discussion we just had on this work that we're doing on these 2 issues around natural gas and EV charging, and then hearing that community is saying it's not a priority was not lost on me. So just wanted to make sure that I had heard that correctly. Perfect. Otherwise, appreciate the report. No other questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Ollie Sullivan. Commissioner Goldstein.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm looking at page, sorry, hang on a second here, slide number 14. These were key themes that were brought up from the Environmental Justice Public Forum number 2. And on the topic of pollution burden, of course, you're talking about traffic. That I don't know how often that comes up for you, but every single planning meeting where we're talking about adding new homes, traffic comes up. So I have to imagine that came up a lot in your meeting with the public. And you're asking for ideas on how to help mitigate traffic problems. And I think one idea that maybe hasn't been explored fully is engaging with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. And I say that because our city council usually appoints at least one person to the MTC. And advocating for kind of a carrot and stick approach to work from home percentages. So you probably noticed during the pandemic that the traffic patterns actually became quite breezy because people were able to work from home. And yet employers, for some strange reason, are requiring people to return to work, return to the workplace. And I think that if we approach that idea with, first of all, the need to reduce traffic congestion and ease the driving burden on commuting employees, and task employers with meeting certain guidelines. So maybe at first no penalties, but asking them to achieve certain limits to improve the quality of life for their employees and the quality of the environment and so forth. Maybe we'll get some buy-in, and then perhaps over time, making it a requirement, an increasing requirement, just as we had increased our own requirements to reduce greenhouse gases. So I think if we can implement some strategy like that with the MTC, we might actually see some good results there. you put in about food access, food access, an item about food rescue. And I think that phrase relates to basically capturing food from restaurants and grocery stores that would otherwise be thrown out. Is that the correct phrase I'm thinking of?
Correct.
All right. To your knowledge, have we actually implemented any requirements for food rescue in the city of Hayward?
There is actually a new state law that went into effect in January, SB 1383, that requires food rescue. So the city itself isn't implementing it, but it is a statewide requirement.
Okay. And is there any monitoring requirement that the state law places on the city?
I'm not sure. Eric, can you speak to that?
I don't remember if the city needs to track any of that, but we do, fortunately, Stop Waste at the county level is playing a large role in this. They're really coordinating all the services to know which businesses are subject to the requirement and what food pantries and the like are available out there to receive the food. So I would expect that most of the reporting is going to happen at the county level.
Yeah, good, very good. Now, I have to imagine a lot of that is really just getting the word out, particularly to the grocery stores, because up until now, they were ordered to just, well, my understanding is, and I could be wrong about this, but I think they were actually ordered to destroy expired food, even though the food quality was still edible for a few days past the printed expiration date. And so I think one of the changes in the law just simply says that they don't have to throw it out, they should actually donate it. Is that, can you correct me if I'm wrong there? Does that sound like that's the case?
To be honest, I'm not sure about the exact expiration date and how that plays into it, but I do know that it's really generally referred to as excess food that, or if they know that it's not going to be used by the end user or the customer by a certain date, then it needs to go to a rescue program. I'm not sure exactly what that time cutoff is.
I see. Okay. All right. I'll probably do a little of my own research and see what I find. In terms of safe and sanitary homes, housing support means a lot of different things to different people. And one of the things that's been noted in some of the prior studies that we've done on homelessness, transitional homelessness, and so forth, is that it's kind of a, you'll forgive the term, it's kind of a spiraling drain. For example, it's often noted that someone who has perhaps some health issue or some other family issue and isn't able to make their rental payment or mortgage payment often then find themselves living out of a vehicle. And by not having a regular home or a permanent mailing address, it makes it more difficult for them to search for jobs, receive mail that might be important related to a job search. And as their condition gets worse, that is, their financial condition gets worse, they often then perhaps sometimes find themselves not being able to get their feet back on the ground. So I'm wondering, do we have programs in the city of Hayward and in the county of Alameda to keep people housed who are experiencing that kind of housing difficulty? And if not, is that being addressed with this specific topic?
I know. Oh, want to go ahead, Leah?
Sure. I'll just step in, sort of just listening. Good evening, Commission. Nice to see you. I am part of the housing and climate team, working closely with Eric, Nicole, Carolyn, and Mira in planning. And so we've done all this work together. So what I want to tell you is, yes, there are programs and policies that are headed by our housing division, and there are services for unhoused individuals, and the sort of spiral effect you were talking about is known and is, being addressed. It's just that with funding, the need is larger than the capacity, you know, and so there are definitely day services and you know, for example, South Hayward Parish, you know, where people can go and get help with filling out DMV forms, get help with wraparound services, even if they don't have a permanent address and are living in a car or, you know, are otherwise mobile. And then I wanted to also just let you know that as a separate item, we will be coming in the next month or so to the commission with the housing element draft, and we'll be taking a deeper dive into these issues.
All right, very good. And so one topic that comes up, we don't currently participate in any public banking, but one of the things that is possible if Hayward were to join a public bank would be to so public banks don't lend directly to the borrower. They underwrite the loans, basically guaranteeing the loan through a traditional bank. And so the traditional bank is then allowed to do some creative financing for instance, rather than being required to evict someone from their home, a mortgage-paying home, for example. They would be allowed to consider a different finance structure to keep that person housed for a couple of years, perhaps, and give them time to, you know, correct whatever's going on in their lives, get their feet back on the ground, and then continue to make payments, which is far less expensive to them and to society generally if we're able to do that. So my recommendation is for City Council to look deeper at that potential avenue of public banking. And that's it for my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Goldstein. We're going to go to Commissioner Lowe.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I want to go to one of the attachments that we received in the materials beforehand, the Cap Mural Board responses, I think it was. And attachment 5, page 2 of attachment 5, it talks about, someone said that we needed to, one of the suggestions was to add public bicycles and near bus stops to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. And I'm wondering if staff has done any research as to whether or not those public bicycles and scooters that we've seen in different cities across the state have actually worked to do that.
We have not done research at this time, but something we will definitely be exploring as we dive into the draft measures. And that's been a common comment we've been hearing from the community.
And then the comment that I wanted to make, when I see that there's a 21.6% reduction between, I think it was 2005 and 2018, and then 25.7% by 2019, and I'm assuming it's going to be even greater when you report out in July, that is pretty impressive if you ask me. And what I've learned from being on this commission for the short time I've been on this commission and learning more about what the city has done, what our city council and our city staff has done over the last few years, it's pretty incredible. Things like this are pretty incredible. And I just want to make a comment that I know it's on the website. If you look through certain documents, after you comb through them, you can sort of find some of this information. But generally speaking, I believe as a regular citizen, I wouldn't have known these things, and other than if I hadn't been on this commission. So I would suggest that we need to really advertise our successes more often and more widely, because there's a lot of really amazing work that the staff and council and the commissions are doing in our city that I believe is going unsung. And I think that we could actually be an example to surrounding cities people knew and to the people who live here, if they knew what was going on, and it was a little bit easier to get that information. So great job, and I hope that statistics like these will be advertised a lot more widely in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lowe. We're going to go with Commissioner Roach.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Lowe that Hayward is doing great on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. There's an aggressive plan in place and it's working, and I'm really proud of the city for those successes. I have a question about so we can make all of these plans, but we have this stream of like a freeway that runs through Hayward every day. People getting to the peninsula and back again. So I'm just wondering, from the staff's perspective, where does that air pollution come into play with what Hayward can do? And I think it goes to talking about regional coordination and what we're doing to either penalize neighboring areas that are not doing their part, and so that we are not bearing the brunt of this, and also because that stream of traffic potentially is going through areas that are bearing the brunt of this. So there is an equity question where that air pollution is going in the city. It's not going into the hills. It's sort of going right through some of our lower income neighborhoods. And so I'm wondering what is being done regionally to address this stream of traffic that Hayward bears the brunt of.
I'm not aware, and maybe Eric, you can jump in on regional efforts. I know we do have a few different measures and policies that we're exploring to address that situation and get people out of cars and onto public transit, active transit, disincentivize driving, and that the VMT associated with that.
Yeah, because it seems like we can do all of that, encourage our residents to get up cars, provide infrastructure potentially. But if we're not asking that of our neighboring cities who are sending their people through our city, then it seems like if we can never do anything about that because we're not working regionally. So you don't, at this point, there aren't efforts working regionally on this specific issue?
Go for it, Eric.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of things in the works to try to reduce. In terms of air quality along the freeways, and we are seeing a lot more EVs on the road today, and we've got an executive order at the state level that basically says that we're not going to be able to sell gasoline cars by 2035. So that's those. Going electric is definitely going to be improving air quality. East Bay Community Energy is working on electrifying, commercial fleets and truck fleets and providing charging in those industrial areas. But there were still but electrification doesn't address the congestion issue, right? So we still need to try to encourage more active transportation and public transportation. And those are being encouraged both by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District through a variety of policies, and also at the County Transportation Commission.
Okay, thank you.
I will also add in the Carb scoping plan, so that's the California Air Resources Board, they just released their draft scoping plan, and one of the measures that could potentially address that is pricing. So putting a price on people using that road. So even if they don't live in Hayward and they're passing through, they could potentially pay a price. So that is one of the options that are being explored at the state level.
Oh yeah, I think that would be something to look at because we do, we are this sort of pass-through city, and I think we would specifically benefit from that. Thank you. I also wanted to ask about the environmental justice work. I was glad to be part of those workshops. And along the lines of something Commissioner Goldstein said sort of sparked my interest that, we spend a lot of time minimizing parking in residential, but not so much in commercial. And it seems like if corporations were allowed to have no parking or didn't have any parking, and we allowed people in their residence to keep their cars there and have parking there. So whether it's single family or multi-residence, that's where the parking should be, because that's where presumably all the overnight charging is happening. But at corporations, and make corporations bear the burden of getting their people to work or allowing them to work from home, and reducing parking in those areas, because those are the places that have these huge expansive parking lots. Just, I don't know, just something to think of instead of trying to take away parking for, people at home where they might need their cars, and to allow them to keep them there because the corporation has to find a way to get them to work might be the better focus. Because I have been concerned about reduced parking and some of the new laws for reducing parking, just because, I think people need their cars. If you're a gig worker or if you're a house cleaner, your car is your work, and having it nearby where you live is probably more beneficial than the people that just park all day at a corporation. So yeah, I'd like us to look at that, sort of flipping that priority. And then the other thing, we're talking about food scarcity. We talked a little bit in the environmental justice workshops about when a grocery store closes, what happens. And I talked a little bit about bringing services or bringing groceries or pop-ups or something to maybe the parking lot of a grocery store that is closed down, to allow people to have access to groceries and in some sort of emergency way, which would reduce car trips. Instead, we're sending everybody somewhere further to get their groceries. And one of the things I was wondering is, are there any models for grocery trucks? So, we have, food trucks and things that come in, but actually like a grocery store that can come in, pop out their sides and offer some minimal amount of groceries. And have you looked at that at all? Is that even out there? Is that something doable?
We have not looked into that, but it's something that we can consider. I know there's been talk about, having farmers markets available in other locations in the city, and it could be a similar effort. But
yeah, thanks. I mean, the idea of just bringing it directly to the place that just lost a market, so that you don't lose that clientele while something else comes in. And then the other thing was just a traveling pharmacy. I know a lot of people, like Commissioner Goldstein was saying, seniors, especially when they can't get their medication, it becomes a big health issue. And so traveling, health clinics, it seems like having a traveling pharmacy might also be something worth looking into to get those services directly to the people that need it. And those are all my comments. Thank you, Chair.
No problem. Thank you very much. And then lastly but not least, Commissioner Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. So I just had a question. These graphs regarding carbon dioxide reductions are really, really interesting. Where could one find the underlying data for them? I briefly looked at the city's website. I wasn't able to find how this was derived. Is that information available?
Well, we currently do not make that publicly available, but I think we could. It's Nicole and Carolyn have been really spending a lot of time. It's huge. I don't know if Nicole, you want to add anything, but it's a huge spreadsheet. There's lots of data we could share, I think, as much as you'd like to see.
Yeah, it's a very large spreadsheet. Happy to share, or if there's also specific things, so it doesn't crash your computer when you try and open it.
Yeah, I was just curious. I'd love to see some of the assumptions that were made in it. And then I have a question too. I was interested really in the food recovery. I think that's a really cool concept. Who's responsible for actually inspecting and implementing that? I understand it's a state law, but maybe I missed that.
It's at the county level.
Yeah, I think the county environmental health department, they're the ones that inspect restaurants, and so they inspect most of the food providers, but I believe it's the larger food manufacturers are actually inspected by the state.
So I apologize for being super negative, but that's my job. So I tend to look in trash cans in the communities throughout the Bay Area because I think it's a really good economic indicator of the health of a location. And I regularly find tons of food disposed of in trash cans that are not far from the city hall. So again, I think this is an awesome idea, and I'm really glad somebody thought about it, but the devil's always in the details with these things. And I guess my whole point in all this is that I think we create a lot of complexity and a lot of laws, and I think it's really difficult to actually administer. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stevens. Boy, I feel like I'm real quiet today, but I don't have much to say on this topic either. So, not that everybody else has already touched on. So with that, I think we are going to move on to the minutes from, I don't know what day, and there's 2 of them, I believe, that we have to approve, but my agenda's not right in front of me. Ugh. Yes, the minutes from March 24th, 2022. Do we have a motion to?
Yep, I'll move to pass the minutes.
And
I'll second.
Excellent. We have a motion by Commissioner Roach, seconded by Commissioner Stevens, to approve the minutes for March 24th, 2022.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and take the vote.
Yes.
Commissioner Ali Sullivan.
Aye.
Commissioner Bonilla, absent. Commissioner Goldstein.
Yes?
Commissioner Lowe.
Aye.
Commissioner Roach.
Yes.
Commissioner Stevens.
Yes.
Chair Okenda.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Next, we're going to move on to the minutes from the meeting April 14th, 2022. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
So moved by Commissioner Stevens, seconded by Commissioner Lowe, to approve the minutes for the April 14, 2022.
Commissioner Ali Sullivan.
Aye.
Commissioner Bonilla, absent. Commissioner Goldstein.
Aye.
Commissioner Lowe.
Aye.
Commissioner Roach.
Abstain.
Commissioner Stevens.
Yes.
And Chair Okenda.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, then we're going to go to commission reports. Jeremy, do you have any announcements?
Yeah, good evening, members of the commission. We do have one item that is tentatively scheduled right now for the June 9th Planning Commission meeting. As was pointed out earlier, we're probably going to be bringing back a housing element update for the second meeting in June. But right now, otherwise, I hope everyone has a great and wonderful extended holiday weekend and a safe Memorial Day.
Thank you, Jeremy. Any commissioners have any announcements? Commissioner Stevens.
I would just like to thank you for bringing us back to this lovely facility and doing such a wonderful job. So thank you.
Oh, I'm really excited that we're all back, and it's wonderful to see. Some of you I've only met in person one other time in the last couple of years. So this is it's pretty amazing that we're back here. And I did have another announcement. I wanted to thank, with a special gratitude in my heart, Miss Denise Chan for her years of service. And she is retiring. And I'm bittersweet to know that she will not be serving with us any longer. But I hope she, is on to bigger and better things. And we do have just another welcome to Miss Avinta. I really appreciate you with us today, and welcome back to the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, I really appreciate you making that announcement about Denise Chan. She's actually retiring on June 3rd. That's her last day after 13 years of service to the beautiful city of Hayward. And I believe she is watching. I was just looking to see if she had joined, but I know she is watching. So thank you again. And we are happy that she's going to start a new new life. She's looking forward to spending quality time with her family. Thank you for that. And also wanted to introduce, and thank you for introducing our new Deputy City Clerk, Avinta Nahuchat, who is here. And she will be helping perhaps for the next couple of months until we find the new senior secretary.
That's
thank
excellent.
You again.
Excellent.
All right.
Yeah, Ms. Madhukan, just welcome again. Thank you. Yeah, Commissioner Roach, you have a
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chair Kenda, for saying that, because I do want to wish Denise well, and we will definitely miss her. And I also wanted to wish Joe great luck in his new adventure. We'll miss him. I've really enjoyed working with him on the Planning Commission. I was sorry to hear that news tonight. I didn't know, but I'm really excited for you. And yeah, Joe, if you're watching, it's been great, and good luck with everything. And thank you for all your hard work in Hayward. Appreciate it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. We love you, Joe. We love you, Denise. All right. With that, I don't think there's anything else. So you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. We are going to adjourn the meeting at 8:50. All right. Thank you, everyone.